Okay, here are the notes. Take these down, right? Copy these down. Hopefully you have a notebook, right, where you're keeping all your notes and you're able to go back and look at them and reference them. Okay, and the same thing for this video. You can watch it over, play it back, pause it, stop it, and view it as many times as needed. Okay, so we're starting this section on factoring. And we've been looking at common factors, and that's the key word, right? So let's go with notes here. This is in chapter 4.4. So you can always reference your book. But the book kind of has a lot of things going on at the same time, so I like to just focus on one piece, one part at a time, right? So we are factoring a common it's a greatest common factor, right? Let me just leave it like that. Factor a GCF, a greatest common factor. But the way you're going to see them here, the where they're going to be written, these expressions, you won't need to find a common factor. It'll be obvious. Okay, so the directions is going to say rewrite each expression in factored, right? The word factored is part of the root word factor, right? Rewrite each in factored form. Sometimes they'll just say factor and they'll just keep it simple and they'll just say factor, right? They won't write all this stuff, but since this is the beginning, this first part should be kind of easy. All right, let's start with number 1. And this is an expression, right? So I got 6 times x plus 6 times 2. All right, so here's an expression. It's something added to something else, or a part here subtracted to another part. Whatever the expression is, that's not going to really matter. For this assignment, all you have to find out is, what do you see in common? What do you see in common? What do you see in common? Right? When looking at this expression, what do you see in common? Well, obviously they both, and I actually made it really obvious, right? I put them in parentheses. This is the common factor. The 6 is your common factor. There's a 6 here and there's a 6 here. This is what's in common, not this other stuff. And I'm really making it really obvious. You see it in parentheses. So 6 is the common factor, right? Okay, I can see that. Now, how do you rewrite this expression in factored form? Well, all you do is this. Since you see that 6 is the common factor, let me write this again. I'll only do this for number 1, but after that we won't do all this writing and explanation. Let me write it again. 6 times x plus 6. Oops. It's okay. We can have another parentheses. It doesn't matter. But I'll just erase it anyways. So what we say is, if this is the part that's in common in both, right? If the 6 is the number that's in common in both, we factor it out. We factor it out. So we're going to take it out of here and we're going to take it out of here. We say that we factor it out. And we write it only one time. Well, we don't need the parentheses. We'll just write it one time. 6. And then we're going to put the other parentheses out here. We factor it out. Right? We factor out the 6. Right? Whatever, factor out the 6 or whatever the common factor is. And if I take this out and I factor it out, the question is, what's left here and what's left here? Right? If I factor it out, and now that I write it here, what's the only thing left here? The x, right? And once I take this out of here, what's the other part here left? 2. So the 6, we factored it out. We wrote it in the front. And then, since this 6 belongs to both, it's almost the reverse of the distributive property, right? We're putting it in front, and then once I take away the 6 or factor out the 6, you're left with x plus 2. This is the factored form, and we just leave it like this. Okay, we'll go a little quicker on the other ones. But whatever the common factor is, you write it on the outside, you put a big parentheses, and then the parts that are left over go inside. Right, so when you factor it out, you only have to write it once on the outside. All right, let's look at some more. Number 2. What if you have 10c minus 10, 9? I mean, you can see when you write it what's going to be in common. I got this part minus this part. What's common in both parts? The 10. The 10 is your common factor, right? So you're going to factor it out. We say that it gets factored out and written in the front. All right, we factor out the 10. Well, we're going to factor it out. And we write it only one time in the front. We factor it out. We factor out the common, right? Whatever you see in common, we factor it out. And in this case, it's called the GCF. Factor out the GCF, but it's what they have in common, right? Not the C. There's a C here, but there's a C here. There's a 9 here, but there's a 9C. 9 not here. Okay. When I factor it out, you only write it one time. The question is, what goes here? Well, if I look at this expression and I take away this 10 and I cover this 10, what's left here? You could see it, right? C minus 9. Right? Once I pull this out of here, factor it out of there, the 9's left over. Minus is in the middle. When I take out the 10, the C is the only thing left in the front. Okay, so this is your factored form. All right, moving on, number 3. Now that's it. Numbers can be factored out and seen in common. Now what you're going to see here for number 3 is variables. Variables can also be common factors. Let me do it over here. Y times Y plus Y times 4. Well, what I like to do, and what I want you guys to also practice, is that the common factor we're going to put in parentheses. You see how I put them in parentheses, and I can see that this y and this y are common. I know there's another y, but there's not another y here. So only one y is common in this term, and one y is common in this term. So this is what's getting factored out. This part that's in the parentheses. When you factor it out, you only write it one time. You only write it one time. And now for this expression, If I took it out of here and I took it out of here and I moved it to the front, what's left over? Well, if you cover it, you'll see what's left over. Y plus 4. So in the first two, we had a number that was a common factor. Number 3, you're seeing a variable. Variable is what was common here. Let's look at number 4. Another situation where you have a, oops, oh, that's fine. What if I do this? What if I put them both in parentheses? That's fine. I can do that, right? That's not going to trick you. You got to look at this part of this term here, and you got to look at this term, and you ask yourself, well, what do they have in common? There's a 7 here, there's not a 7 here. It can't be that. There's an x squared here, but there's not an x squared here. So what do we have in common? The x, only the one with the 1x. That's it. That's your common factor. Whatever is the same here and the same here, we can factor it out. Okay, so remember, when you factor it out, you only write it one time. You only write it one time. And then you put a parenthesis like this, a big parenthesis, and you put the rest of the expression here. If I took from this first, here's the minus sign, right? From this leading first term, if I factored out this x squared, what is left? I'm sorry, if I factored out the x, what's left over here? X squared. Minus, and if I factor this out and wrote it in the front, what's left in the second term? A 7. Right? Okay. And then the last two examples, well, they're going to get a little bit more challenging, but I think you'll see a pattern here. 9m times m minus 9m times 2. Well, I think when you're writing this, you can see what it is that you're writing, like that's repeating, or what's common. What do we have that's common? What's common in this term and this term? The 9m, right? The 9m. So we got 9m. That is the common factor. That's what we factor out. And when we say that we factor it out, we kind of pull it away from here and here, and we only need to write it one time. You only write it once in the front. Yeah? And if I pull this from this expression, and if I take the 9m from here, from the first term and from the second term, and I move it here, what is left? If I pull this out here, what is the next part? What is the part that's left over here in the first term? M. And if I cover it up, or I know that I factored it out, what's left in the second term? 2, like that. And you see that this is the reverse, or going backwards to what the distributive property is. The distributive property, we have a number here, and we will multiply it to the first one, and then we multiply it to the second one. Well, when we're factoring, we're going backwards. Okay, so find the common factor, factor it out, or we say that we factor it, so we write it in the front, right? We factor out, and you write it in the front. And then from the expression left over, you'll see what's left, the remaining parts of the first term and the remaining parts of the second term. All right, last one. Now, this one's going to look a lot more challenging, but it's not, right? Because we are just looking, and here you're going to have, instead of 2 terms, we have 3 terms. But I think I'm making it really obvious, and this is what I want you to practice. What is common? What is common in these 3 terms? Well, we're writing it in what? Parentheses. A here, and A here. That is the common term. And now we have 3 terms. It doesn't matter if you have 2, or it doesn't matter if you have 3, or you can have more. But what we're looking for is what is in common in all 3. Now, even though these two had another A and another A, we couldn't factor out another A because this one doesn't have an additional A. But don't worry about that now. This is already written so that it's kind of really obvious what is the common factor. So if we factor out this A from each of these 3 and we only write it once, right? When you factor it out, you only write it once. Then what is left over for the first term? What is left over for the second term? What is left over for the third term? Well, for the first term, you're left over with, right? If I take this out, the leftover term is A squared, then minus from the second term. If I factored out the A, what's left over 5A and plus 3. And that's how we do it. Okay, good luck with this assignment. Make sure you submit it.